Aloha once more. As your eyes were closed in meditation, you were not aware of my physical presence. And yet, you felt the power of that meditation. Now, in that same way, please learn to meditate even if I'm 10,000 miles away, because it is possible to have the same meditation with me, whether my body is 10 feet away from you or 10,000 miles away, since neither my body nor your body enters into meditation. It is you, an invisible being, and it is I, an invisible being. We are meditating, and we are just as much together when we're 1,000 miles apart as when we're 10 inches apart. That makes it possible for you to realize that meditation is not a thing of body. Meditation is a thing of the soul. It's soul communion. And so we can unite in meditation any day, every day, as many times a day as you wish. It is only necessary to take the same attitude in meditation then as you did tonight, closing your eyes, shutting out the physical presence, and remembering that we are spiritually united, that there is a bond, an invisible spiritual bond which unites us. We are one in Christ. We are one in spiritual essence. We are one in our divine sonship. I in you, you in me, we in God. Now, meditation can be as simple as that. Just closing the eyes and remembering that we are united in our spiritual consciousness, just as we are united when we are sitting here together. And in the same way, then, you will quickly find it possible to unite with every student of the Infinite Way all over the globe, because at every hour of the day, some groups are meditating somewhere, and it is always possible to unite with them, as it is possible for us to unite here, or for you to unite when I am away. And as you have seen now, meditation is not dependent on physical bodies. Meditation is something that takes place as an activity of consciousness, as an activity of your soul. It is for this reason that the Master's message becomes clear to you when he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you until the end of the world. Now, he wasn't talking about his body. He was talking about his self. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you unto the end of the world. I was with you before Abraham was. Before Abraham was, I am with you. And so it is that at any time, whether we are in the present or whether we're in the future, we can always remember in our meditation, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. And therefore we are united in that I in thee and thou in me. And so you will come to understand the entire message of the Master, which is based really on that very teaching, that it isn't a physical relationship that we have, it isn't a physical bond that exists between us, it is a spiritual one, and therefore it is not dependent on time or space. It has no relationship to past or present. Before there was a founder of the Hebrew race, there was this I that was ever present with men and available to those who could recognize and realize that. This I of which Jesus spoke was his developed spiritual consciousness. And so it would be if I were to say to you, I will never leave you nor forsake you wherever I am. At first, if you weren't this far along in understanding, you would think that that was a finite person who couldn't dare make that promise because someday he might pass on and then that would be a lie. But you can see at this stage that it is the truth. Here or there, here or hereafter, now or future, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. As I was with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so I will be with you. And all you have to do is close your eyes as if you were in this room with us all together, and you will find that it is so. Peter and John gave the same revelation to the Hebrews when they marveled that a crippled man should jump to his feet. And they said, Why marvel ye, men of Israel? As if we of our own selves had done this thing. The same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, hath done this thing. The same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead will quicken also your mortal bodies. That same Spirit hath done this thing. Just think of that. 3,000 years before came Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but the same Spirit that animated them 3,000 years ago is here now to raise this crippled man and set him dancing. So do you not see that at any time of the day or night we can meditate with the same God of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob? We can meditate and commune with the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead. Just think, the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead is in this room, is present with you, and goes out of this room with you, and goes before you as you leave this room to make the crooked places straight, and goes before you to prepare the many mansions for you. The same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead. So at any moment of the day or night, we can sit down and meditate and commune with the same Spirit that 2,000 years ago raised up Jesus Christ from the dead and 5,000 years ago animated the message of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and carried them all across the Holy Lands, bringing to light the wisdom that has traveled down the century. There is only one Spirit, and so it is that the same Spirit that we call the Buddha nature is the same Spirit that we call the Christ nature. There is only one spiritual nature. Men call it by many names. The same Spirit that has animated any prophet, saint, sage, or seer 5,000 years ago, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, the same Spirit that animated them is here to animate us. And our function is to be still. Be still and know. And now what are we to know? I will never leave you nor forsake you. I am God. I am the same Spirit that raised up Jesus Christ from the dead. I will never leave you. I will be with you until the end of the world. Then I is the Spirit of God in man. I is that Spirit of God in man, which is the resurrection and the ascension. I. All we have to do when we meditate is close our eyes and remember he hath promised, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I will be with thee unto the end of the world. Whithersoever thou goest, I will go. Since before Abraham was, I am with you. I will go before you to make the crooked places straight. I go to prepare a mansion for you. I in the midst of you am mighty. Be still and know that I am God. And then you be still in quietness and in confidence. Be still, and you will receive an inner assurance that this is true, that I literally, really am with you. The same I that was with Moses, was with Jesus, was with Elijah, was with John, was with Paul. The same Spirit that animated these men, that same Spirit animates us. Only we must be still and know that the promises that have been given through all ages are true. They haven't survived unto this time as lies, as false hopes, as vain imaginings. They have survived because it is literally true that whether it was Moses 1,500 or 2,000 years before the Master who says, I am that I am, or whether 2,000 years later it's the Master who says, I am that I am, or whether it's 96 years later through the tongue of and mouth of John, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, or whether it is still in that later period with Paul when he says, I live yet not I, Christ liveth in me. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. The same Christ of which Jesus spoke, the same Christ or Spirit of which every saint and every seer has spoken, and that Spirit is here and now, and it is with us wherever we are. But just as electricity must be contacted and hooked up, so must we hook ourselves up through our consciousness, through our conscious awareness to this truth of being. The magic word, the sacred word, the secret word is always the same word. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I, the Spirit of God, will be with thee forever. I will be your meat and your wine and your water. The only difference between the human being and the mystic, the seer, the saint, the sage, the only difference is that one has attained an awareness of this inner presence. Even the Master could say at one time, I am a man even as you are. And John, in speaking of Jesus, referred to him as this Jesus, the son of Joseph. So there was only a man as we are, but with the one difference that that man attained a or the supreme illumination or realization of a presence ever with him which he called the Father within me. That is why he could say, I can of my own self do nothing, because he was a man as we are. But the Father within me, that which I have realized, that divine presence which I am, or which is called I am, that spiritual selfhood, that spirit within me, it doeth the works. If I speak of myself, I speak a lie. I bear witness to a lie. My doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me. This presence, this power, this being, this I that I am. And in quietness and in stillness you receive the assurance of its presence within you. And that is the only difference between a mortal who must die and the Son of God who is immortal and eternal and liveth forever. That is the only difference between a human being breaking his back or his head to get along in life, or the spiritual being who can say, ah yes, the Spirit of God is with me on my travels or in my labors or in the fields. I can do nothing of myself, but by the grace of this withinness I can do all things. That's the only difference between the human being that we were born and the spiritual being that we are all seeking to become. We are it, but we have not achieved the realization of it. And when we do achieve the realization of it, or in proportion as we achieve the realization, the world have received this Spirit of God in them through some act of grace beyond their own knowledge, seeking, or ability. We know, for instance, that the boy Samuel in the Old Testament, right from childhood, heard the voice of God, heard God speaking to him, and in this early childhood his mother dedicated him to the temple, to the service of God, and he became a rabbi, priest of the church. We are all waiting eagerly for the completion of these translations of the Jordan manuscripts, Dead Sea Scrolls. For that same reason, it is possible that there will be some history of the man Jesus, because in the literature that we have, there is none. It speaks of him only at 12 years of age when he enters the temple, and then we lose him until he is 30, and he starts out a full-fledged rabbi. But that can't be. That can't be. At some point along the way, there must have been an anointing. There must have been a dedication or an ordination. At some point there must have been spiritual illumination. We know nothing of that. We have no record of it. We have only a record of him as a boy, and then a record of him as being in the ministry as a rabbi, preaching in the synagogues, and then finally being crucified. But actually, how he came to his illumination is guessed at, but not known. And some of the literature, which is supposedly based on ancient manuscripts, tells us that before he was 12 years old, he was already so one with God, so much in the realization of his true Christhood, that he was accepted by this order of rabbis and taught from those early days before he was 12 until he was ordained at 30 for the ministry. Be interesting to learn about that, to know how it happened, why, if those documents are still available, because it is literally, only in different degree, it is literally the experience of each one of us. We are human beings up to a certain point, like as other men, having the same desires and tastes and appetites and illusions and hypnotisms and mesmerisms and all the rest of this. And then at a certain point, there is a transformation of consciousness, and all of a sudden we are aware that we're not alone. There is a He that is within me that is greater than any circumstance or condition in the world. There is a He that performeth that which is given me to do. There is a He which perfecteth that which concerneth me. Always there is this He. Now, those who do not receive it, as Jesus must have, as Samuel did, may receive it as Moses did, through struggle. When you think of Moses running away from a crime and hiding himself as a shepherd for 21 years, how, for one reason or another, his thoughts turned to God out there under those semi-tropical skies, how the mystery of life must have coursed in his veins, until after 21 years of aloneness, the realization could come to him, I am that I am, and the presence was so much with him that when he went out to bring the Hebrews out of slavery, he knew that it would speak through his tongue. It would voice itself through his lips. That's how consciously aware he was of a presence within him. So in some measure, as you study the lives of religious revelators, every one of them, it makes no difference where you turn, whether to those old Hebrew leaders or Jesus, John, Paul, Peter, Luke, you will find that at some period in their existence they too became aware of the silent invisible, and that it spoke to them, and usually in the word I will be with thee, I will go before thee, I will make the crooked places straight. And then as you follow those who came later, Muhammad and Baha'u'llah, one of the great mystics, the Persian mystics, you'll find in the history of every one of them that a certain period in their life, all of a sudden they were aware. It is as if there were a voice speaking through them that wasn't their own and to which they were listening. Even as the words came out, they themselves were listening. They knew that it wasn't their human self talking. They knew they weren't indulging their own message. They knew and called it the voice of God, or the voice of the Christ, or the voice of the Spirit. And they knew also that its name was I and me, capital M-E, and I. Always through their writings you will find I and capital M-E. So it is too in the Hindu Bhagavad Gita. All the way through the song celestial, turn unto me, have no faith but in me. Until you realize I, you will not eat of the divine food. All the way through the Bhagavad Gita is that same message. I, seek me, turn only unto me, let me be your life, seek ye me, all the way through. And so it is, regardless of which of the major religious teachings that have come to man through a spiritual leader, you will find always that a particular point in his life, and for some particular reason, that inner self became real and announced itself and spoke, and always spoke using the word I, as if there was something speaking to me and I'm hearing it, and it is saying, I give you this work to do. Or, step aside, I will speak through you. Or, I will prosper thee in the way that thou shouldst go. Look at it all through the book of Isaiah. See how clearly it's stated there. And then you'll see that it wasn't a God in the skies that talked to these men. It was a presence within their own being. But see how they must have been attuned in order to hear it. Now, when these men are teaching others how they may achieve the same state of consciousness, how do they teach? Well, they say, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. If you abide in the Word, and let the Word abide in you, you will bear fruit richly. Turn ye to me and be saved. So forth and so on. Always these men teach the same thing in quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. In the secret place of the Most High. And the Master says that when you pray, go into your sanctuary and pray in secret. When you do your alms, give alms, but do it secretly. Always silently, always secretly, always in quietness, always in confidence, in the realization of this inner soul pouring itself out. And we all have it, but as Browning has told us, we must open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape. Each one of us has Christ locked up in him. Each one of us has this I locked up in us. Each one of us has this divine presence. Each one of us has that He that is within me. Each one of us has the Father within me. Each one of us has this Christ in me, the hope of glory, and so forth and so on. Each one of us has it, but we're told we must open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape. Sometimes it's difficult for us because we can't add Christhood to the human being that we already are. In proportion as we die to what we have been as humans, do we bring alive the Christ in us. There must be a dying daily of some of those old qualities that constituted our humanhood before we can achieve our Christhood. You can't add Christ to the human being still concerned solely, completely with his own personal demonstration. You can't add spiritual power to selfish desires because they no more mix than oil and water. In some measure, we have to be abandoning our fears, our doubts, our hesitancies. We have to be abandoning some of our personal will, personal wishes, personal desires, and at the same time giving sufficient time to our meditations. Then do we achieve both the incoming of the Christ and the outgoing of those traits of purely selfish humanhood. And when it's all over, what do we find? We are the same people, only with different thoughts inside. We are the same people, only now with an inner assurance, an inner confidence, an inner conviction, and outwardly some measure of demonstration. The world outside hasn't changed. Our attitude toward the world has changed. Our mode of living has changed. Just think what happens to an individual who all of a sudden discovers, I'm not alone. There is a he within me, or an it. Think of the transformation that takes place in that second when you say, oh, well, now I don't have to take thought whether what I shall eat or what I shall drink or wherewithal I shall be clothed. Or now I don't have to take thought with whether I shall go here, there, or the other place, or when. Now the he is a realized being, activity within. And then there's always, as we get pulled out of our spiritual nature, there's always a returning to it in meditation, a waiting, a patience, and finally that release, which again tells us, I can do all things through Christ. In those earlier days, they had far less of spiritual and mystical literature than we have today. And not only they had less of it, but there were fewer copies, because each one had to be hand written. And there were only a very few people who knew enough of writing, printing, to turn out these manuscripts. And then only those with great education could understand them, because as we go back to those manuscripts, we find what for us would be a very sad condition. They used no vowels and they used no punctuation. And each scholar had to add his own vowels to suit himself and put in his own punctuation and his own paragraphing and his own sentence endings. None of that is in the old ancient manuscripts. They just wrote their letters, and then you came along and decided where the sentence ended, and then you decided which vowels belonged where and how to punctuate. See that? They had difficulties. We have it handed to us on a silver platter for 10 cents, 25 cents, 35 cents. It's easy, really. But it is our absorption or our devotion in the spiritual literature which aids us to find our inner peace and quiet in meditation. And then when we find it, then we find we need no outer aid later. We can at any moment retire within. It doesn't always follow that you find this inner peace in the first minute of meditation. You may come to a place sometime where almost at will and within a minute or two it will come. But don't be surprised if you also find that there are times when you may have to keep at it for 5 or 10 minutes and come back for 5 or 10 and another 5 or 10 for several hours before you really get back into it, because there are apt to be disturbing elements in thought, not your thought or mine, they're world thoughts which come in, which throw us off the center of our being. And then it may take a while before we get back into that center. But the point is that we have something that is more tangible than our loaf of bread. And that something tangible is the Spirit of God that raised up Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago from the dead. The same Spirit that was in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The same Spirit that went before Moses to release the Hebrews. The same Spirit that brought manna from the sky, opened the Red Sea. The same Spirit that multiplied loaves and fishes out in the wilderness with the Master. The same Spirit that healed the sick and raised the dead through the Master. That same Spirit is here, closer to you than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. It rests with us to recognize this truth and to accept the promise, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. I am closer to thee than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. I in the midst of thee am mighty. And then to be willing to sit patiently. I know that that promise will be fulfilled in me. I know that that promise was for all time, not merely for 2,000 years ago. It was before Abraham, and it will be to the end of the world. I is within me, the same Spirit that multiplied loaves and fishes, the same Spirit. Do you remember Isaiah 61? The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, and I am ordained to heal the sick. Now remember, that same Spirit is upon you, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. That same Spirit that ordained every minister, every spiritual minister, every spiritual healer, that same Spirit that has accompanied saints and sages and seers throughout their career is closer to you than breathing. It isn't a different one, it isn't a lesser one, and it isn't a Jewish one or a Christian one. It isn't an Oriental one or an Occidental one. It is the same Spirit that was the Spirit of the Hebrews, the Spirit of the Christians, the same Spirit that animates saints and seers and sages. That same Spirit is closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, and it is always waiting, eager, willing to speak to you through the voice of I. Now remember this in your meditation. You are never separated from I. We can unite in meditation at any time, whether we are physically close to each other or physically far apart. We just close our eyes, wipe out the human bodies that are around us, realizing we're not meditating with those. We have no interest in those. We are meditating in each other's consciousness. I and thee, and thou and me, and we in God. There's an invisible thread uniting each and every one of us, whether we are 10 feet apart, 10 inches apart, 10,000 miles apart. There is an invisible thread uniting us in Christ, in the Spirit of God, in conscious union with the Father. Where two or more are gathered together in my name, there is that same I again in the midst of you. That same I am with you. Would you turn it off for a minute? It spoke very quickly this way and said, remember, I am not in your experience to destroy error. I am not in your experience to remove sin, disease, or death. I am here to give you the assurance that there is no other power than this I in the midst of you. This is the only power there is. I am. I am the only power there is, so you need not fear that which is outside. You need not fear that which is inside. You need not fear, for there is no power but the power which I am. I am all power. I am the only power. There are no powers against which I contend. There are no powers for me to subdue. I am that I am is the only power. Fear not. They have only the arm of flesh, nothingness. I alone is power. I in the midst of thee, I in thee, and thou in me, one power. Beside me there are no other powers. Fear not what mortal man can do to you. Thou couldst have no power, Pilate, over me. There is but one power. I shall not fear what mortal circumstances or conditions can do to me, for within me is the only power. I in the midst of me is the only power. The remembrance of this is salvation. You need not fight. Just remember this presence within you. You need not fight. The battle is not yours. Stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord. And it doesn't say the Lord will fight. It says, see the salvation of the Lord. See how error dissipates itself in the presence of the realization of one power. One power, not one warring against another, not one overcoming or destroying another. I am the only power. Fear not what mortal man can do to thee. Fear not what mortal appearances can do to thee. Stand ye still. Am I not more than these? Am I not more than these? I who will never leave you nor forsake you. I who go before you to make the crooked places straight. Am I not more than all these appearances? Thou shalt have no other gods, just a supreme faith in I, the presence of God in you, for I will never leave thee. And I is the only power and the only presence. Would you cut it off, please? When you are meditating, never feel that you are alone. If it is necessary, bring yourself back in thought to this room this evening, and let this scene relive itself in you, so that you have the actual feeling that you are uniting with all of us in meditation. As you close your eyes this moment, you do not know who is sitting next to you or across from you, because you have wiped out their physical presence, and yet you know that you are meditating, spiritually uniting in God, spiritually united in the consciousness of God's presence. You can do this at any time that you wish, for you will never be alone. You will always be in spiritual consciousness, and you will always be in the companionship of those who are on the spiritual path, for they all have the same name. I is their name. And you will always be united in this consciousness. Never feel that you're alone because you don't see any other person's body around you. Their body has nothing to do with your loneliness or lonesomeness or aloneness. Nothing. It is when you are in their consciousness and they are in yours that you are tabernacling with God, with the Christhood, with united consciousness, oneness, completeness, perfection. I will never leave thee, so you'll never be alone. The kingdom of God is within you, and God is forever in his kingdom. I is ever present within you, even though it goes before you to make the crooked places straight. I in thee, and thou in me, and we in God. Never again feel alone. And whether driving a car, in business, in school, in the home, never hesitate to close your eyes for a second, or keep them open as you will, but realize I in the midst of me, I and my Father. And then you will know the meaning of sainthood. You will know what it is to have that feeling that always there is something within you to assure you that you're not alone, and that you are not living your life alone, but something is with you, always, forever and forever. Thank you. Thank you.